We want to take the opportunity to introduce ourselves as a group. In order to do that, I want to give you a feel for who we are. We're a group of guys that have been together for quite a long time. We started this just as guys sitting around around the TV, watching football and having fun. A gentleman by the name of by the name of Roger Fox, made the suggestion, and it was accepted that we become more formal, that we needed somebody to kind of keep us together. He then took the responsibility of calling people, setting up the meetings, and Roger did that for many years. After Roger passed, Rosie assumed that responsibility, and you'll hear from Rosie today. And he now contacts us and kind of sets the agenda, which is kind of a fluid agenda, but he brings us together. And Willis backs him up. And you'll hear from Willis and all the other gentlemen in the group. But the purpose of today of this video is to capture the career experiences of our group and basically to introduce the group as members and where they are from and what they've done. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bill Kent.
Well, thank you, Greg. Yeah, you know, this group is, everybody here is retired. So we're not young people, we've gone through some experiences. And a lot of us were involved in the space program and so forth. And we want to make it known that people like us was involved in putting a man on the moon, involved in planetary science and so forth, because we can't talk enough about that to our kids. So this is really for our kids. It's not about us, but it's about our kids and for them to see who came ahead of you. So my friend Rosie will kind of kick things off. Oh no, B's going to kick things off. Good morning, B.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Bill Jackson, better known to the group as B or Biscuit. And just give you a quick little history. When I was 5 years old, I ate 13 biscuits for breakfast. And that's stuck with me since I was 5 years old. One of my cousins saw it and she just started calling me. And it's been that way. I'm originally from the state of Kentucky. Willis and I are practically neighbors. We grew up in the same neighborhood, same kind of background and stuff. Modest high school career, you know, the sports and so forth and so on. Upon graduation, attended Western Kentucky University in Bowling Green. After a couple of years, I upset my father because I had quit and joined the Marine Corps. Went to Vietnam in 1965, March of 1967, 18 months, excuse me. During that time, the government sprayed the Agent Orange. We've all heard of the Agent Orange. And I was one of those victims that was affected by some of the effects of Agent Orange. And had no problem getting the government to do their share, and they took care of it. So upon getting out of the Marine Corps, I came to Pasadena and worked briefly with the McDonnell Douglas out in Torrance. And then I started meeting, seemed like the people I met were from JPL. I think I'm the only one of the group that's not from JPL that was in the space program. I got into law enforcement in 1971. And 34 years later, I retired from the Elliott County Sheriff's Department. During that time, I had 9 different assignments, and which of a lot of experiences and all the things I've done. I've dealt with O.J. Simpson on a personal basis, just like we are right now. Just a lot of Hollywood type people that was around during that time. My son is currently a sergeant with the Glendale Police Department, so the leaf didn't fall too far from the tree. I was married. I've been divorced for about 26 years now.
Whoa.
Never did it again, but out of that, I have three kids, and 4 grandkids. Life has been grand. I had a great time in that during my career, and I met some beautiful people. Even though I'm the outsider, as I would always say, you never know it from the way the group treats me, as if I was right in the middle. And for that, I'm very thankful. And with that, I'll pass it on to Willis.
Good. It's interesting that we talked about being the outsider, but the group is not made up of just JPL people or just whatever. The connection that we have is that we grew up like neighbors, and so we got our start with just being a group of guys watching football games and socializing, and then as we retired, we just started hanging out. Thought we'd like to keep in touch with each other. So I just learned something today. For all these years, I've been calling him Biscuit for his whole life. I didn't know why. So here we are. Okay, B. I'm Willis Meeks, and since Bill talked about space, aerospace, I think that's what brings most of us together. After high school, I joined the Air Force and had a career in avionics. That's airborne electronics, the computers and all the brains of a rocket or a missile. That's what I did. Some of the stuff helped design, and some of the stuff I've maintained and whatever. So early on, after working on bombers and tankers and aircraft, when the missile program started, myself and 2 or 3 of our guys left Savannah, Georgia, and came to Vandenberg Air Force Base. We worked there before we had any hardware. We just went to school all the time, learning how the missile program operated. And then once we finally got hardware, we were really the pioneers. We were there for like 2 years before we ever launched a missile. But we learned a lot. We were grunts, actually, like 1 or 2 stripes. But because we were on the ground floor, we actually worked with contractors like Boeing, TRW, Rocketdyne, and all those guys. And since we had the time to spend, we were trained on everything to do with the missile program. And so I can recall we worked in the Western Test Range, and I can recall one day driving home from work, and I heard on the radio about this place where they were launching a mission to Mars. That was back in 1964. And I was excited about that. And so from that time, I was focused on going to this place, this JPL, Pasadena, California. And as God directs things in our lives, a couple of years later, I came down to JPL. I had some amazing experiences there. You talk about people who were in the science program. I ran into a guy, and most of you guys know Jim King. Jim King was a PhD from Caltech. He grew up in some place in Georgia, some small town in Georgia, and he was a good football player and a good student. And somehow he ended up going to Morehouse College. And from Morehouse, he got connected with Caltech. And he went to Caltech and got his PhD there. And since JPL and Caltech are connected, he ended up being a supervisor there. And when I came to JPL, he was one of the first people I met. And this guy was absolutely brilliant. He was a supervisor, and I'll bring up some names that I still remember. Like, he hired a guy named Lowell Thayer, PhD. And these guys were all about science. And so there was another guy named William Williams, another PhD. There's a lady, Dr. Jackie Jacobs, and all this brain power of our people were working at JPL, and they contributed to science. And I think that's worth knowing. Now, it turns out that I was working on the Surveyor satellite. And since we just came on the 50th year of the landing on the moon, little is known about the Surveyor program. But before the Apollo program got started at JPL, we did all that stuff as part of the program. I mean, we flew the Surveyor to the moon and landed on the moon. And that was in June of 1966. It turns out that I was on the console talking to the tracking station, and when that first picture came down, I saw it. I was right there seeing it. Think about that. My heart rate just went crazy. And I remember after I got off the ship, calling everybody that I knew around the country. We didn't sleep for days. We would go home and try to sleep for a couple hours and come right back to work. And that went on for a long time. And so we actually had a tracking network, and we actually trained and wrote the procedures for the people that worked on the Apollo program. I was a contractor for Bendix. I was a network controller, which means, when you hear people saying Australia coming up for a tracking pass, and then Madrid, Spain, I was a controller, and I control the network for all these stations. And I can recall the station in Australia. I can remember some names: Bruce Wendo, and Bob Leslie was the station director down there. And so my team of controllers had to send directions to the station director on what they were going to do for the next tracking pass. And this went on for like years. And then one day, one of the government officials from Australia came, and he came into network control, and he looked at me and his face got strange, and he whispered to me, "You're black." So,
Surprise.
So in all those years, we have been talking about our families and the whole thing, and I guess it never occurred to him that I was black and doing what I was doing. So, after that, I, just moved on and got promotions here and there. And, eventually, I ended up as the project manager on Ulysses, the Ulysses program, which actually is the only mission we've ever had that flew over the poles of the sun. And that went from 1990 to like 2004. So it was exciting. We made contacts. We traveled all over the world. And while we're talking about it, I just got information like 2 days ago that I was a project manager on Ulysses. Our project scientist was Ed Smith, renowned scientist known all over the world in the scientific community. He was the project scientist on Ulysses. He passed like 2 days ago. So for whoever sees the video, I just want you to remember Dr. Ed Smith, big contributor in science. So when I retired from JPL was in 2003 or so. Ed Massey had joined us, and he worked with me, trained with me, and so when I left, he was prepared to take over as the project manager for Ulysses and some other stuff. So I'll just let him pick up and take off from there. Ed Massey.
So I'm Ed Massey, and I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, and I was basically born there, raised there. Went through high school there, and then I went to Tuskegee Institute at the time, where I ended up with a Bachelor's of Science in Engineering, and also was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. My assignments in the Air Force, I stayed for 20 years, retiring as a lieutenant colonel. I dealt with primarily missile and reentry vehicles, data processing and analysis, tracking of military satellites, including communication satellites, navigation satellites, and what was called national assets. Once I retired from the Air Force, I joined JPL. Willis Meeks hired me as a administrative assistant, and through the years I became, in addition to administrative assistant, science instruments manager, and a deputy mission operations manager. And when Willis retired, I took over as project manager. I did that until the mission ended in 2008. About a year or so after I took that job, George Texter retired from Voyager, and I ended up with the Voyager project as well. So I did that until I retired. Voyager's still flying. Unfortunately, Ulysses is not. Over the years, there have been quite a few interesting things that happened. Of course, when I was manager of Voyager, Voyager had already gone through its grand tour, but there were other things to be done, such as finding the termination shock, that area where the winds from the sun are equal to the winds from the outer space. And so that happened while I was the manager there. And of course, I was not there when this second spacecraft did the same thing. But over the years, I was the first, that I know of anyway, manager with two major projects like that. I retired in 2010, but before I retired, I guess 2 years before I retired, Willis had invited me to come out to the luncheon with these guys. And so I've been doing that ever since. So it makes about 11 years for me now.
We all are JPL ex-employees. I started there back in the early days of the contracting done by Bendix Field Engineering. And I think several of the guys, I know Meeks, we started working, I started working with Bendix Field Engineering. There was a man by the name of Lee Ozar was the managing at that time. Lee was he was a cool dude. He had the responsibility of getting the project, getting people to work on the project, to work on the computers and be computer operators, et cetera, et cetera. That was his job. Bendix won the contract to JPL. JPL, and I'm going to be right up front with you, JPL had very few blacks working there. I use blacks, didn't I? The word in those days were Negroes or colored people, okay? Had very, had very few of those people working there. And So Leozar had to go out and get some Negroes, some colored people. Okay? So he did. He came to me. Well, no, he didn't come to me. It was advertised in the Pasadena Star News that JPL needed some computer operators. Now, I'm an alumni of Tuskegee Institute, Alabama, and I'd moved to California with the intention of going back to Alabama and complete my degree there. But that didn't happen because I met two sisters from Houston, Texas. But I'm a Tuskegee person. I got to go back there and finish up at Tuskegee. She said, you can transfer your grades from Tuskegee to California. We've got colleges here. Now, they told me that they are hiring people at JPL, black people. So I said, okay. So I applied in December of, I think it was 03. I'm sorry, 63. I applied, and sure enough, Mr. Leozar called me. So now we're talking December 31st, he said. You're supposed to be here December 31st. And I said, I didn't know that. He said, okay. Well, show up next year, January 6th. I said, okay. So I told my future wife that I had a job at JPL. She got excited, and I can't think of the guy's name. We were working for Bendix Field Engineering. Leozar was the head man of Bendix Field Engineering. And I looked around, and I saw one black in building, we call Building 230. That was the computer building. I saw one black guy there. Now I saw this black guy every time I walked by a computer. That was me. I didn't see any of the black guys. So I stayed there and I worked and I did my job, learning how to run what they call it, the 40s, the 1994s, or whatever you call those things. So I stayed there for a while, and I worked there. I worked there at JPL for 16 years. Then I eventually said I got enough. I was what we call computer burnout. So I just left. I went to my supervisor and told him, I said, hey man, I'm leaving Friday. Ken, where you going? I'm getting out of here Friday. But you got to give
your JPL experience.
Yeah, you got to give us a 10. Give us a notice, 10-day notice. Mm-hmm. I said, no, I'm gone. So come that Friday, he expected me to be the boy and take his word to stay. I went to him, I said, man, where's the paper I'm supposed to sign to get out of here? So they got the papers together, and he was shocked, and I left.
I'm like Biscuit, I'm from the outside. The University of Missouri, Cal State LA, and I finally finished up with a doctorate at UCLA. My background is originally science with Jackie. I knew Jackie from a while back. And organizational development, strategic management. Those are the areas that my expertise is supposed to be in. But what like all of you know is that you start one place and you end up another place. And you'll attest to that as we go around this room. As far as coming, I started out as a teacher because I, like you, found somebody that I love, and but there was nothing out there, so I was taught to work. So the first thing out there was get a job, and I became a teacher. I came into JPL's family. My sister, didn't you know Vivi? You remember Vivi?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Vivi worked in professional development. Vivi is my sister. Vivi got on the phone and said, "Hey, Greg, I got something for you. I think you'll like this." And so I went and I interviewed. George Taylor hired me, and I came in as your career counselor. And then I worked from there to your employee relations person, sticking my nose in the stuff that was rather difficult. My responsibility was to help people who needed help, who their supervisors and so on and so forth were not treating them right, and finding ways to put them in the back in the dark, and not being supportive of who they were and how to help them move forward. In that process, I met many of you at this table who were very helpful to me, because you don't move without that kind of help. But anyway, I went from there to I supervised training. One of the things I was proud of, remember the diversity training that you got when you went through? That was, I put that together. That was mine. That was the first time. The manager, Jay Smucker, they'd come to us, and because they were getting complaints from all their supervisors, their white supervisors, to help them with their minority supervision. And it was coming from a variety of places. And we put this together. And it was shared. We were the first group in NASA to do that. And it was shared throughout NASA, that particular training. It wasn't the best, but it was better than none. And it was appreciated. So the supervisors then had a way of being able to work. They felt comfortable that they had a tool to be able to assist them with being supervisors. Didn't make them the best, but they made them better. And over the years, I was in employee relations manager, and over the years, I've been able to work with people who help people. This is what this group does. And that's why it's so important to me. Willis grabbed a hold of me one day and said, "Hey, I want you to come on over here and you know some of these people, and I do know some of them, and I'm glad I have an opportunity to be a part of it, because anybody looking at this video will see that there's the kind of experience and the kind of acumen that is necessary to help our people. So if there's something that tweaks you, that excites you about what you see, get in contact with us, and that'll be available somewhere as we go along, because we have something to share, and we want to share it. Yeah, who's next?
Beautiful.
I guess I am. My name is Tillman Owens, and I'm a native Pasadenean. Grew up here, been here all my life. Only moved away for a short period of time, 6 months from Venice Beach. I found that drive from Venice Beach to JPL to be just too gruesome, too grueling. But the way I started working at JPL is, my story is I'm really a non-degree professional. And I went to school, I went to college, Pasadena City College. I just never graduated. In fact, I got burnt out working, partying, and homework. It just got to be too much, and I said, I'm going to take a break. I took a break, at the time I had $8 left to my name, and someone picked my pocket, took my money, or maybe I lost it. I was at a party one night, and there was a name that hasn't been mentioned, but I'm sure he was part of this group, and some of you probably know him as Real-Time Ron.
Whoa!
Real-Time Ron. Real-Time Ron was telling a friend of mine that JPL wasn't meeting their requirement for hiring minorities. And I overheard this, so I needed a job. And that Monday, I went and applied, and the job I got was called an expediter. And the only requirement for that job was you needed to have a California driver's license. And when I got that job, the expediter, I drove a truck around the lab taking computer programs from one place to another to be processed. My supervisor told me at the time that in your spare time, you can learn to run these computers. And that's where I met Henry. Henry was a computer operator back in those days, but I started running those computers in my spare time, and I fell in love. I fell in love with computers. I mean, I only knew computers to be those things that were in the movies, but I found that those computers were really real. And I fell in love, and I started taking classes and getting trained, and I grew from being an expediter to a computer operator to a software engineer, software test engineer. One of the names that you've heard someone speak of, Roger Fox. Roger Fox was really instrumental in changing my attitude. Because when I started working at JPL, I was, for lack of a better term, I was really a cool jerk. But I was a smart cool jerk. I mean, I've always been a straight A student all my life, but I just always been cool too, you know. Roger had tried to get a job for me as a lead operator, as I was really deserving of it, because, I mean, you know, but he got shot down trying to get me the job. He pulled me to the side one night after trying to get me this job for a whole week, and he told me, he said, "You know where I've been all week?" He said, "I've been trying to get your, you know what, a job. And when these people finished chewing on me, I didn't hardly have enough to go home and sit down on." That turned me around. That really turned me around. And within 6 months, I mean, I came out of the cool jerk thing at work, started dressing business casual, and within 6 months, I started climbing, and I never stopped climbing. And so I really owe a lot to Roger, and I think, you know, the guys in this group are those kinds of people, and they have personally touched my life. I know at some point, 6 years in my JPL career, someone tried to fire me. Rosie saved my bacon. And I just found out last week that Greg was also part of saving my bacon. And so these guys are really helpful, and Mr. Willis has from time to time pulled me to the side and given me helpful advice, not all of which I did, you know, follow, because I never got that degree, but I don't think there's a person on planet Earth who studies more than I do. I always study and always learning, because I operate from the perspective that I gotta know more, I gotta be better. And I found that I had to be better, and I had to know more to earn less than they did. But that's, you know, they always knew what was happening. But that's my JPL experience, and I spent 21 years there when I got laid off from JPL. Actually, I was a contractor. At that point, I was working for Telos Aerospace. When I got laid off, I was training college graduates to come in and take over my job. And so now I'd like to pass this on over to Mr. Henry Dillard.
You would, wouldn't you? Yeah. My name is Henry Dillard. I was born and raised in Pasadena. Did all my original schooling through high school and Pasadena City College. While I was at PCC, the president of the school convinced me to walk up a block to the off-site computer lab, which consisted of a plugboard computer in those days with the little wires that ran between the plugs. Most of you probably don't even remember that stuff. And from there, I took an interest in computers and stayed in the computer department at Pasadena City College until I saw an ad similar to what Ken saw in the paper and actually applied to Bendix in 1967. And I was hired. I was hired for the graveyard shift, so I never saw anybody. When they brought me to the daytime, there was a group that used to have lunch, and one of those people was Ken, one of those people was Willis, and we would all sit around and like the whole total black population at JPL was around this one table. And that's all there was. You could go anywhere else and there weren't any black people, except secretaries. And so I managed to make some progress at JPL and moved into software testing. And so I did some initial work on Mariner 69, one of the pioneer missions. But the thing that strikes me most about going to those meetings for those missions was I was the only black anywhere in sight. There wasn't another black person anywhere to be found, anywhere on the team. So after a number of years, and making the unfortunate mistake of thinking software testing was not going to be a career, I left JPL and went to TRW, where I found software testing in a disciplined way was a career. And so I spent 12 years at TRW working mostly on classified missions. So I didn't have the space background that everybody else has, but I did all this classified work at TRW, and then the drive from Pasadena was a bit much for me. And so I reached out to a couple of friends, one of which was Willis, to circulate my resume at JPL. I got a call to come back to JPL from one of those resumes that Willis circulated. And now, when I came back to JPL, I again was doing military stuff. The first 3 or 4 projects I worked on at JPL were still military based. So I didn't really interact with a lot of these people because they weren't working the same kind of projects I was working. I was in pretty much a closed environment. And so now, going back to the original time when I was with Bendix, Roger Fox was a good friend of mine. He and I used to work together on a regular basis. But I never interacted on the space side. Fact is, when all of the military work at JPL ended, I had trouble getting a job because I didn't have any space background. So I ended up in the office of the CIO, still doing IT work, and that's where I retired from. So yeah, born and raised in Pasadena, educated in then I educated at PCC. I went to Cal State LA, graduated from Cal State LA, and then some years later I went to Azusa Pacific and got a master's in computer science. So that's been my career. One of the people I've known the longest is Willis. Tillman, almost as long. Ken, ancient history, he was old enough to be my dad when I was. That's kind of my background in history.
So we're gonna close out, Rosie, or?
The Lone Ranger.
Damn, Rosie.
The Lone Ranger.
Nobody left but you.
Well, I'm gonna go after Rosie.
I can add a couple of things I was thinking about. This is a great group, but I want to mention a few people who are not here. Frank Tillman from Connecticut is an engineer, superb. He's a physicist, and he does amazing things. He's not here today. Chuck Williams, another guy who's a member of our group. I know he started at JPL as an expediter and worked his way up, and then years later I ran into him at Stanford. He was just doing stuff, and he's quite an accomplished person. I also want to mention some people that I've run into over the years, because when I was on Ulysses, I was traveling around to different NASA centers. But some people who came through JPL, Stephanie Wilson. Stephanie Wilson is an astronaut, but she started as a junior engineer at JPL. So anybody who's interested can Google Stephanie Wilson. She just might be the first person to fly on one of these missions going to the moon. Okay. Another person was Claudia Alexander. Claudia actually got to be a project manager. It was an extended mission for Galileo, but she was a project manager. Unfortunately, she passed away at a young age. But when we have Black History Month, I keep hoping and thinking that there should be a story about her. Claudia Alexander, Google her, she's there. A couple of other people that I want to mention, not JPLers, but they came through. Guyon Bluford, who was the first black astronaut. I actually know Guy. I met him at Houston. Terrific guy. He actually stayed there to give me a tour around. And who am I? But he did. Another guy, another astronaut. Mae Jemison came through JPL. She was a doctor for one of the healthcare places. She flew as an astronaut, and then she later went back to medicine. Another guy who was the director of shuttle operations, I think. He was a commander on the space shuttle, and for the life of me, I can't think of it. Fred Gregory. There you go. Thank you, Ed. And see, that's been our relationship all the while.
And as a young black person growing up on a farm, it had its pluses, it had minuses, like everything else. We raised everything that we needed to sustain the family right there on the farm. A couple things we had to buy was sugar, and sometimes we would have to buy flour. My farmable years were on the farm, and I came along, I guess, when farm life was being implemented. There were a time when we had animals that did the work, but then when I was old enough to plow the fields, my father had bought a tractor, and I loved farming then. I mean, I could ride around all day on this tractor. I went to school, as I said, in Haywood County, Tennessee, and there was only one black school in the county, a four-year high school in the county. And I entered the 9th grade at this school at the age of 13. I wanted to be a doctor. My father wanted me to be an undertaker. And so there were some clashes there. At 16, I became ill with an undefined illness. And I had to drop out of high school. And I was hospitalized on and off, for about 6 months. So when I was finally released from the hospital, I didn't know why I was there. I just knew I was going in and out of the hospital. And it was years later that my father told me that he had been told that I had a fatal illness and that I wouldn't live till I was 20 years old. I didn't know that then. So being a young, adventurous person, like I said, I wanted to be a doctor, but I knew that wasn't going to happen because it just wasn't there for me. So after I went back to high school, after being out a year, I graduated a year late from high school, but then my father hadn't told me that he had been told that I had a fatal illness until he found out that I was joining the Air Force. And he told me, well, they're not going to take you because, this is what your health is like. But I said, well, I haven't had any problems, and if I had health problems, I thought that the Air Force would probably be the place to be rather than a country doctor in Tennessee being providing me with health care. So I joined the Air Force, and I did my basic training at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas, in San Antonio, Texas. And after basic training, everyone was given a 24-hour pass to town, to San Antonio. And of course, the first thing I wanted to see was the Alamo in San Antonio. Went into San Antonio and very disappointed with the Alamo. It wasn't like I'd seen it in the movies. Florida, I would say, was a lot better than Mississippi. However, there was still Jim Crow. So after the first launch, my commanding officer asked me if I would like to retrain into a new system that was coming online and that I'd have to go back to school. And I says, no, I don't want to go to Biloxi anymore. And he says, well, no, it's not in Mississippi, it's in Colorado. So I accepted the offer to go back to train again. And this time I was trained on the newest Air Force ground-to-ground missile, which was the TM-76 Mace missile. And this missile, I was a guide system technician on this missile. And this missile was one that could be fired and forgotten. The missile would follow the contours of the Earth. You could program it to fly at 500 feet. And when it gets to a mountain, it climbs up over the mountain, drops back down to 500 feet, so it flew under the radar. So I was trained as a training instructor on that missile. And as a result of being trained on the guidance system, I also was trained as a launch control officer. And we were all trained to be able to launch the missile in case something happens to one of us, or we were attacked and the site was blown up, and if there was still enough people on the site, we could still launch the missile. So I went to school in Colorado, for 9 months. And it seemed like that's all I did while I was in the Air Force was to go to school. 9 months in Colorado, and came back down to Florida, and we had to go through the same thing again. When we got ready to launch, we still couldn't stay in the hotels with the white guys. After 7 months in Orlando, and after the launch, we had about 6 weeks between launches, and if you were on the team that did the launch, you got you were off for 6 weeks. And often I would be sent out someplace on the PDY. I've gone to Turkey, I went to Saudi Arabia. And since I had the background for the electronic countermeasure, and they were flying U-2s then, and those U-2s was flying out of Turkey. And so what we did was sort of a classified thing down there. I mean, I won't go into that. However, during that 6 weeks you're off, I mean, if you wanted to go to Europe, you could hop up, catch a plane, fly up to Europe, and you know, you could stay up there until you were required to come back to Libya again. Ammunition, guns, whatever was required, this launch team that had been down to Libya to launch a proficiency mission. So anyway, to make a long story short, I mean, we made it back to within like 10 miles of the coast of Libya before we crashed into the ocean. And they had sent out 2 helicopters to pick us up, and we were in the water at the time. So the first helicopter came, and everybody was on the ropes. We were all going to get in this helicopter. The load master said, wait a minute, all you guys can't get in this chopper. I mean, there's another chopper out there. So nobody was saying a word. Everybody's just climbing the ladder. I mean, so anyway, finally they got things under control, and we split the difference. I mean, it was 16 of us aboard that aircraft that day, and about 10 of us were on the first chopper, and the rest were on the second chopper, and we made it back to the base. The other experience I had was one where a British exploration team had found an old B-24 aircraft in the desert south of Benghazi. And this aircraft, we found later, had been on a bombing mission during World War II to Italy. And on the way back, it ran into what we called a Ghibli. Every day in Libya, as regular as 2 o'clock came, you had a sandstorm where we were located. And it just obliterated everything. Everything was brown. It was a brownout. So when they arrived back, they'd been on this mission to Naples, Italy. So when they arrived back at the coast of Africa, flying radio silence, they didn't realize that they had crossed the plain of Libya again. So they just kept flying, and they flew south, for about 300 miles before they ran out of fuel. And all of the crew bailed out. The plane crashed. And this plane had been down there at the time for about 18 years. So I had the good fortune to be chosen as one of the ones that go there to help document what was going on, or what we thought went on with this crash in the desert. And it was quite an experience. The aircraft still had, the crew clothes were still hanging in, still had water in the water cooler. It had oil in the oil tank. It was just out of gas. And it was there lying in the desert. It looked like some giant hand that just took it and broke it in half. So what happened to the crew? They bailed out, and then they started walking north. They didn't really know where they were in the Libyan desert. They were 400 miles south of where they wanted to be. But they were like 20 miles east of an Egyptian encampment. But they trudged on northward, trying to find a way out, and they died one at a time. And all of them were found except one. To this day, I don't know if he was ever found. But then while in Libya, I was training launch crews. So I did. And when I had my exit interview, again, I was told by my superiors that you're not going to find a job, and you'll be back here begging to get back in the Air Force. So what they didn't know is that I had a job. I had applied with a company that built I applied with a company that built boosters for rockets, and they were in Littleton, Colorado, and I was a test engineer for them. One day I saw a ad in the paper for people they were recruiting for people on the distant early warning line in Alaska. And one of the reasons that I didn't like where I was working was because it was like 10,000 feet up in the mountains, and you go up there in the winter months, you may not be able to come down for several days. So hence, saw this ad for technicians in Alaska. So I applied, and I got the job, and I was sent to a site 200 miles south of the North Pole, a place called Point Barrow on the Bering Sea. And my job there we were snooping on the Russians. We could, from our advantage point up there, when Russia launched a missile, we could see it about 3 minutes after it left off the pad. We could see it because we were at the top of the world looking down at them. So I was up there for a year, and if you signed for an additional 6 months, you were given a bonus of $10,000. This was more money than I had ever hoped to see. I couldn't imagine what $10,000 looked like. So anyway, they would give you $10,000, and they'd give you an R&R to any place in the world you wanted to go, all expense paid if you come back for 6 months. I did it. And I blew most of my money in Fairbanks meeting when I was coming down. I hadn't seen people in years. Wild women in song in Fairbanks. But anyway, I rotated back to California with the company that I was working for up north. And I was going to go to this little town called Lompoc, California. So I wasn't too concerned about this because I figured, I would go home, see my father, and see my relatives at home, and then I'd just hop a flight and I'd go to Lompoc. So I was due in Lompoc on Monday morning, and Thursday I called airlines and says, I want a one-way ticket to Lompoc. They said, to where? I said, to Lompoc, California. And so there was a silence on the line, and pretty soon they came back and said, we don't have anything that flies there. I said, we don't, as a matter of fact, we don't even know where it is. So I said, oh my God, I got to be there, Monday morning, and they don't know where it is. So anyway, the TWA, when I called them, they said, well, it sounds like it's someplace up around San Francisco, so we'll send you to San Francisco, and they should be able to tell you where Lompoc is. So anyway, hopped on a plane in Memphis, flew to LA, changed planes, and flew to San Francisco. Flew right over the top of Lompoc on the way to San Francisco. Got to Frisco, inquired about Lompoc. They said, oh yeah, that's about 500 miles south. Didn't you just come in on this flight? I said, yeah. He said, you just flew over Lompoc about an hour and a half ago. So they said, well, we have two buses, 2 Greyhound buses that go to Lompoc, and one's going to be leaving soon. And one goes directly to Lompoc, the other one goes to Santa Maria, and you should be able to get a taxi to Lompoc from Santa Maria. So I did. I got on a bus, and I came back to Santa Maria, California, and I arrived in Santa Maria around 2 o'clock in the morning. And Santa Maria is a small town. The sidewalks had been rolled up. There was nobody there except one taxi driver and me after the bus left. So I was looking. So he says, where do you want to go? I says, I want to go to Lompoc. He said, okay, I can take you to Lompoc. So we hopped in a cab, and he brought me down to Lompoc. So never will forget, when we were approaching Lompoc, we came through this pass, and I looked, as we reached the summit, you look down in this valley, and there were all of these lights. So anyway, he asked me, where do you want to stay? I said, the cheapest hotel you can put me in. So he took me to a cheap hotel in Lompoc. And I went to bed that evening, or that morning, actually. Woke up early, decided I wanted to find a restaurant. Looked out of my window, and I didn't see anything. There were no other buildings, nothing but farmland. I said, damn, this is what I'm trying to get away from the farm. Look what I came. I said, well, I'm not saying to myself, I'm not going to be here long. So I went downstairs and inquired about a restaurant. He said, yeah, there's one 2 blocks up the street. So I went back, showered, and went up to this restaurant where I met an airman, and I was telling him about my plight. He says, "Oh, well, yeah, that's all vegetables out there now, I mean, but wait till June, it'll all be nothing but flowers. It'll be a beautiful valley that's all blanketed in flowers." Sure enough, I mean, after 6 months up there, I mean, it was as he said, I mean, flowers of all different colors. So I worked for the same company that I worked for when I was on the DEW line in Alaska. It was only 2 black people working on this contract at the time. And it was me and another black guy from another site up on the DEW line. Anyway, I didn't have any place to stay when I got there, and no car, no visible way of getting to work. So this guy said, "Well, I live in Santa Maria, and I'll come to Lompoc every day and pick you up, bring you to work until you get yourself home." So anyway, that happened. He made that happen. But then everything was going along fine until about 2 years into this contract, they started hiring people out that was getting out of the Air Force, and that's when everything changed. I worked at a site on top of a mountain, and we had to park our cars at the foot of the mountain and ride up in a company car. So we were coming down one night, and this little guy in the back seat says, "Hey, why don't you turn the radio on so we can see what the niggas are complaining about tonight?" And my supervisor was driving the car. So I didn't say anything. So when we got to the parking lot, I asked him, "Did you hear what he said?" And he says, "Oh, he didn't mean anything." That was a standard for white people up there. When you were insulted or belittled, oh, they didn't mean it. They just wanted to see what you were going to say. So I said, "Well, what if I just punched this little guy and kicked his ass?" He said, "Well, I'd have to fire you." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, for fighting." I said, "Well, did you hear what the guy said?" "Well, I told you he didn't mean it." So this is what I put up with from the time I guess the 3rd year I was at Vandenberg Air Force Base. Then from the 3rd year until the time I left, I mean, it was more and more of these people getting out of Air Force, and had a guy told me that I didn't belong there. I mean, what I was doing, I mean, white people did. I mean, black people aren't supposed to be doing this. So anyway, after a while, I mean, I was about ready to commit murder, and so I said, "Well, this is not good. I need to leave." So I started seeking employment otherwise, and I came across this ad in the paper again, and they were advertising for JPL. So I had to come to LA for the interview, and I came down to LA and I had the interview. And at that time, when you interviewed for a job, I mean, you were given a test to determine if you could do the job, I guess. But anyway, I passed the test and I was made an offer. And after one other important thing, I was at the Cape when the fire occurred on the Apollo spacecraft. We were running tests on that spacecraft that day when Grissom, White, and Chaffee was killed in that fire. Never will forget that, I mean, because we didn't know what had happened. All we knew that we had dropped a signal between the spacecraft and the site. So after about 30 minutes, I mean, the security guards came in and they locked all the doors to the site. Nobody was to leave, confiscated all the tapes, all of the data mediums, and they still didn't tell us what had happened. We didn't know what had happened until maybe, let's see, a half an hour, 45 minutes later, they told us that there had been a fire in the spacecraft. But we didn't know that there were anyone killed until that night when they finally let us go home. But that was an interesting experience I had. And then after it was proven that the station at the Cape could track the missile through the flame, and we were deactivated. And part of our site went to Newfoundland, and the rest of the site was going to Guam. So I was scheduled to go to Guam to help set up that site when I came to Pasadena. I came to Pasadena because my wife is from Pasadena, and her mother was ill at the time. As a matter of fact, she was in a diabetic coma. So when I came to Pasadena, I knew Willis was here because he and I had worked together up at Vandenberg. So I looked him up, and I had lunch at the lab one day with him. And I'd never seen so many black people with jobs in my life. You know, because where I was always the single black person, no matter where I went. Even in the Bahamas, you know, where it's 88% black, I mean, I was the only black person on the site. But anyway, I thought that, God, I mean, I died going to heaven. There are black people here in heaven. I mean, so. And I told him that my wife's mother was ill, and so Willis asked me if I wanted to stay in Pasadena or work at JPL. So they intercepted our personal effects, which were in Hawaii by this time. All our luggage, our stuff we were going down to Guam was in Hawaii, so they found it and they had it sent back. I'd done all of this on my GI Bill, and at the time I had money left over in my GI Bill. So to burn the money, and I say it without apprehension, that's all it was, burning the money. I went back to flight training school and trained in the Cessna Citation jet. I knew that I would never own a jet, that I wouldn't be flying a jet, meaning at $500 an hour, but I do have a type rating. I did have a type rating in the Cessna Citation. The other thing that I did after coming back from the Bahamas was to start buying real estate. I bought real estate. The 210 freeway was coming through Pasadena, and white people were running like scared rabbits. You know, they were giving away houses. The first house that I bought in Altadena, 3-bedroom ranch-style home with a large swimming pool. I picked it up for $2,000. I took over the guy's payment, gave him $2,000, took up his payments, and he owed like $8,000 on the house. That house I sold for $110,000, invested in more property, and that's what I've been doing since.
My name is Frank Tillman, and start off with how I became an engineer, the passions that drove me to become one, the path that I was on. All of that was pretty ordinary, normal, and usual, except, and there's always that except. I went to the University of Connecticut, graduated in engineering in '66, but that except was about 2 years into that stint. I became a land surveyor. Summer job. Figured it would just last a couple of months, but lo and behold, it was very instructive to me. Everyone's seen land surveyors and the tripod in the streets, and this was a small 3 to 5 man office, so you did the work. I mean, and we would start out, somebody would own a plot of land literally in the forest. This is in Connecticut. And we would go out there and literally have to hack the brush away to get lines of sight. And then I'd come back the next, and we'd lay out this little subdivision of 10 houses in a cul-de-sac street. Come back the next summer, and there it is. And that was something to me, to see your own work go from a forest to a cul-de-sac with houses. And that's in my sophomore year in college. So that pretty well cemented me. The other input to my passion was where I lived in my youth, which was New York City and environs, Long Island. You're just surrounded by nothing but tall buildings and bridges. And this is probably my first 15 years of life was in New York City. So that also cemented me, so much so that in New York, Long Island, at the school system I went in, and maybe some of this is the resourcefulness of Frank Tillman, in order to go to a four-year high school, you had to have a career booklet. It was one of your, quite a significant thing, which I think society has gotten away from that, but they should have that. And in order to go to a four-year high, you have to have your career book. And mine, of course, was on engineering. So not to waste that career booklet, I went into engineering at the University of Connecticut, graduated in '66. While I'm on my education segment here, I went on after the University of Connecticut and got a bachelor's degree. I also got two master's degrees from University of Southern California, Southern Cal, both in engineering in '71 and '75. My parents moved to Connecticut when I was 15 from New York City. And so that is my passion, how I've got into the engineering, and it's from starting pre-four-year high through college. It's a pretty normal route, maybe not as exciting as some of the others here that went in military route, but I think everybody has their passion and how they got that passion, military, mechanical, or whatever, but that stayed with me, many of those things through life. Short segment of how I got to JPL, and so that's how I got into engineering, my education, my path. So from '66 to onward, I went to JPL. 41 years of aerospace structural analysis and tests. I started out in '66 at Grumman on Long Island in a military plane. And someone says, well, with all those buildings and bridges, what are you on a military plane for, Tillman? I said, well, it's '66 and everybody's going into the military for the Vietnam build-out. And so I took that route for fulfilling that obligation, took the job at the defense concern, which was Grumman. They built military planes for carriers. I did that for a year. And the other side of the complex of Northrop Grumman was the Apollo project, and all we did was just look over there and see what was going on over there. So I said, couldn't wait to get transferred off the military plane onto Apollo, which I eventually did. And I said, well, this is me. In 1967, you're on Apollo, you're in heaven. So 67, if you go through the Apollo, it's the tail end of it. Armstrong's walking on the moon in another year. They said, well, Tillman, if you want to get into the Apollo, you should go to California. And that I did. Worked for Boeing and Downey. on the redesign of the Apollo spacecraft after the fire. I think previous person might have spoke about the fire who actually was there. So I worked on the documentation and analysis of the redesign of the spacecraft after the fire. By now it's 69 and Armstrong's on the moon, and so I had things were coming down. I had this habit of eating, so awful habit of eating, so I said I better get another job. So I got a job at Lockheed Burbank on a commercial airliner. That's now my second path, deviation from what I wanted. One was the military right out of school with Vietnam, and the other is the Apollo program coming down. But it turned out, next day I got a job on this commercial airliner, Lockheed, and that lasted for a few years. And at the end of 3.5, 4 years, at the end of that, there was an opening by Martin, which was merged with Lockheed, that to place somebody at JPL, which I applied for that assignment and took it. Didn't have to move or anything. So I became, I wasn't a JPL direct, but I was, all of these jobs I've had up to Boeing and Northrop Grumman and Long Island are all direct jobs. So this one I'm direct but on loan to JPL. And it was such an exciting place at the time. There was an opening for a direct job in '74, so I put my stint in for, which I don't think we should have this, auditions of African Americans at JPL where you constantly being auditioned for direct employment, but so be it. That's what it is, and I think is still the case, sadly. I rose through the ranks as a doer, a group leader, a supervisor on some exciting projects. Ended my career as a doer and a technical supervisor in '04, but then near the end of my career in '07, I retired. That's very quickly how I got into engineering, how I got to JPL, couple of side deviations, path deviations there, but it all worked out what I thought pretty good. One of the things I'm addressing is secrets of success. I became a principal engineer. That's one of the highest levels at JPL in the technical realm. And the secrets of getting there, I felt, was obtaining breadth and depth in that discipline, and also the responsibility and growth. As a doer, I was also an initiator, leader, and innovator. One innovative project I directed was on large JPL spacecraft Galileo, which was one of the first, I believe, the largest payload in the shuttle. And I had to, or my group, under my direction, had to come up with the safety package that would be the pre-launch safety package that had to be prepared and delivered to Johnson Space Center to get pre-launch safety approval to launch this at the time, gigantic payload in the shuttle, the biggest payload in the shuttle, not only of JPL to that point. There was no template for that particular presentation, but we pulled it together, and the secrets of success, if you're looking at that, is innovation, initiator, type, beyond your immediate group. Getting approval from your peers, and most people think, well, to get ahead, I'll get approval from my peers, my immediate supervision. But you need to go, I needed to go, or felt I needed to go beyond that. And I went external to my immediate discipline area and included the customers in the project area and other NASA centers. Like I said, I delivered that presentation to Johnson Space Center. I wound up in my career going to all 6 or 7 NASA centers and either working with them or presenting to them, as well as the European Space Agency. I think I was there 3 or 4 times or more. I found this out very late in my career, that you needed to branch out beyond your local unit, because to get promoted beyond a certain level, you needed recommendations from people external to JPL even. You had to have external to JPL, which I had to get. And which I did, and things worked out. Again, if I had to do it all over again, what would I do differently? I would have probably gotten out of so-called technical expert mode and went into management earlier. I think the promotions and accolades would eventually come, would have come earlier. And so that's not a lesson, but an observation that I think is worthy of passing on. Timing is beyond one's control. As I said, went out of school. First job was on a military airplane. At the end of Apollo, I went into commercial aviation, all of that before JPL. So there's factors out there that you can't control, I couldn't control, and I think it worked out to the good. I did make principal engineer. They did call me back for like 8 years after I retired on a part-time basis, and so if anything, gave me some validation of my path and what I did was right. Either that or I flunked retirement. So mentoring and coaching, that's the final thing that gave me some very personal satisfaction. I've had 4 young engineers out of the dozens or scores that I've hired over the course of my these JPL 20 years of hiring. 4 went on to section management or project management level. I guess I could name them. McCoy, Ellen McCoy, Bill Mateer has actually worked with one of the previous presenters. There's Darlene Lee and then Ann Moritz. These are all people that made it to at least the project management, the section management level. My final accolade, very personal accolade, was at my retirement luncheon when a section manager gave me a 3/4 page personal letter telling me that, thanking me for giving him the influence him and giving him the guidance to continue on to a path. I was an African American person, high person at JPL. I won't say their name because this letter was very personal to me. He was probably 10 or 15 years younger than me, and at the time, I didn't think I was influencing this person, but he felt my performance and was enough on him that he even thanked me in this letter, which I was at the top of. Everyone has their box of stuff, and his letter is at the top of that box. And so that's my story, and that's it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bill Kent, and this is my story. In 1961, President Kennedy made a commitment to put a man on the moon within the next decade, and the space race was on. I came to JPL in 1963. I had been working for Sass Engineering over at RCA and Sunstrand Turbo, because we moved around. It was what they would call a job shop. And so I got an assignment to work at JPL. I had picked up an AA at City College with a major first in drama and then in architecture and then in engineering, and moved to Northrop University. Northrop Grumman had a little campus over there in Englewood, where I was studying mechanical design engineering. And one summer, with all the excitement about the space race and so on, I thought I would give it a try and see if I could get me a job actually designing stuff. I just couldn't wait, so I went. I would get up every morning, pack my lunch, go out, and go on interviews every day. At night I would go through the papers, find other destinations, go out again. I did that for about 2 or 3 weeks. And finally I landed a job at Sass Engineering. Thank you, Al. And I was a happy camper because now I was in a field that I could really enjoy, and I had a passion for it. So in '63, when I came to JPL, I came there as a contractor. JPL was involved in the Ranger program. I worked on Ranger 7, 8, and 9. So they had done several Rangers before I arrived. Some of them crash landed, some of them soft landed. But I got in on the 7, 8, and 9, working on the structure. And at that time, there were not a lot of black people at JPL, but there were 3 or 4 in the design section that I'd like to mention. A good friend of mine, Jim Allen, and Cliff McCoy, and Roger Bryant, who had his own group later. And we were the only people of color in the design section, which was unusual because most sections maybe had 1 person, maybe 2 at the most. So that was a big number. And then a couple of years later, Carl Roger invited me to become a JPL employee. And I spent 34 years working for JPL. And it was an interesting career because there was always something challenging happening. It was demanding, and at the same time you couldn't get enough of it because you were on the cutting edge of what was happening. So I worked on Ranger 9, then the surveyor that went to the moon. It was more sophisticated. It even had a device that could dig up some soil and analyze and break it down and then send the information back to Earth. And then finally in July of 1969, Apollo 11 landed on the moon. the space race was on, and we had to beat them to first base. I went on to work on quite a few missions to Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and Venus. And those were all challenging missions. Oh, also I got to work on the Space Telescope, which is really a great thing. It's out there now, looking into deep space and giving you really pictures that you've never seen before of other planets, other galaxies actually. And that was one of the last projects I worked on. So but one of the other things I was able to get in on at JPL, they have something called Space Flight Transfer Applications Program. And what they would do, they would take the technology that had been developed at JPL for outer space and try to apply it to the civilian side of the house. And then they would give that to, it became public domain, whatever information they would gather. And so I was chosen by Alex Irons, a scientist, to work on a project concerning dry heat sterilization. And there were 3 of us on the project there, Paul Muter, Dr. Irons, and myself. And we went out to the 2 teaching universities here in town, USC and UCLA Medical Center. And we would have meetings, and the question was, what is your biggest sterilization problem? And they both said that the biggest problem they had was with the ordinary ventilator, kind of a respirator that you hook up the patient to aid in breathing and so forth. That thing, you get all that hot breath in there, you create a lot of germs. It's hard to get it clean. And at that time, they were autoclaving the respirators to get them clean. Well, Dr. Irons told them that the only way you can achieve 100% sterilization with dry heat. At JPL, we take the entire spacecraft and put it in an oven and cook it for a certain period of time. When you take that thing out, it's 100% sterilized. That's why you see the guys walking around with the white smocks and the gloves and so forth. That's all to prevent contamination, because you don't know what could happen if that went into deep space and landed on some planet. Ordinary germ on Earth might end up killing whatever life exists on that planet, or it could turn into a monster like Star Wars or something. So everything had to be 100% sterilized, and dry heat was the way to go. So we took the respirators and we redesigned everything to make them use materials that was dry heat sterilizable, built a filtration system for both the oxygen source and for the patient's breath. And then I would truck them back and forth to UCLA, and they would give me dirty ones to take over and measure, and then we would sterilize it and go back and measure it again. 100% sterilization. And it really became kind of a big deal. We got a write-up in National Geographic, and I got Sherry Grizzard. I don't know if you guys remember Sherry. I got her to model the thing. So this big, beautiful picture of Sherry holding the device, and they gave us some money. They gave us a monetary award for it, and also our names got on the patent. That was an exciting project to work on. Some of the other interspace things that I did, I worked on a device that was used to measure the ozone. And this was an ozone scanner that we designed, and you would hook it up to a supersonic fighter jet, and they would just fly across Alaska and measure that ozone and keep up with the size of the ozone hole, which is getting larger all of the time. And really, it's a serious matter for the future of our planet. I got to work on a device from Roger Bryant's group that was dealing with earthquake slippage along the San Andreas Fault. And we built a mobile device that you could take and set it down on each side of the fault, and then you would shoot a certain quasar and get an exact measurement here, move over here, and do the same measurement, and then triangulate it to get the exact distance from those 2 points. Come back 3 or 4 years later, go to the same points, shoot the same quasar, and you could measure that slippage within a quarter of an inch. Really outstanding stuff. So those were some of the other programs that I involved at JPL. When you think about it, and when you think about JPL, we always are reminded of their ventures into outer space and the space probes that they did, which was very important. But innovation was the big thing, and a lot of that got transferred back to everyday life too. We would not have a common cell phone without micro miniaturization. And we wouldn't have micro miniaturization except that it was necessary. If you're going to go into space, you can't carry all of that weight, and so you have to make things lighter and lighter and lighter. And so a lot of the technology that was developed for outer space is now used every day. The other day, my little granddaughter, who is now 5 years old, she had the cell phone there, and I said, "Don't mess with my cell phone. You're gonna jam it up." And she says, "No," and she went and got her program on YouTube. I said, "It's got to be educational." She said, "It is educational. See here," and she's playing this stuff on YouTube and so forth. And I just backed off and let her have the phone because she was more adept than I was at going to her program and getting her program up on the screen. That's where we are now. We were in the space age, but now I submit that we're in the information age. And that's an exciting place to be. Because when most of our careers, we had to do a lot of research, and we had libraries available where we would dig out parts and see what we were going to buy, what we were going to apply, and so forth. And then now all of that is at your fingertips. All you got to do is ask Google. There it is. So you don't have to have the right answer. All you have to do is come up with the right question, and the information is at your fingertips. That is exciting. That is phenomenal. That is the time that we're living in. And it's a very exciting time. So thank you for your time. I've enjoyed this event. I would like to thank our filmmaker, Charlene Kent. And we'll see you next time.